A few months ago, a new man moved in across the street from me. On his very first day, I noticed something immediately unsettling. He had set up a telescope aimed directly at my bedroom window. My first actual encounter with him was just a few days later. He knocked on my door to introduce himself, and one of the first things he said to me was, "I was worth going to jail for." My blood ran cold. The entire exchange was deeply unpleasant. I managed to close the door on him, but he persisted, knocking again until I reopened it. I warned him clearly not to come inside. He simply stared blankly, then walked away with a strange smile and without another word. I went back inside right away, rushing up to my bedroom. I was not at all surprised to see that his telescope was still pointed squarely at my window. I remember taking a super long shower, desperately hoping to clear my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Every sound I heard made me think of him. The very next day, I went to the police. I thought, surely they will listen to me. I explained the whole situation and how deeply concerned I was. Unfortunately, I was quickly reminded that, as a woman, you are sometimes not taken seriously, even in frightening situations like this. The officers listened, but they seemed uninterested in what I had to say. One asked me if I was sure I wasn't just imagining things, and another simply stated, "It's not illegal to own a telescope. Come back when you have actual proof." Apparently, him coming over and making such a terrifying remark was not enough evidence either. In the officer's eyes, it was just a distasteful joke. I went home feeling defeated. Just as I feared, things got worse a few days later. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed a shadowy figure through the window. He was hunched over the telescope, as usual, but his movements were different, more frantic. I realized he was masturbating while watching me. What's worse, when he noticed that I was looking at him, he didn't stop. He actually started moving his hand faster, as if me watching him was exactly what he wanted. Just before I could pull away from the window, the movement stopped, and he pulled his hand out. I saw something drip from his hand, and I felt sick to my stomach. I actually ran into the bathroom and threw up. I stayed awake all night, realizing that this was truly a nightmare, and that this man was a psychopath who would terrorize me endlessly if someone didn't stop him. I stayed awake until the police station opened and immediately went back. I told them what I had seen, explaining that my exhaustion was because I hadn't slept due to the terror. I desperately hoped they would finally understand the severity of the situation. I told them I was scared he would eventually find a way into my home. I even told them about my ex-boyfriend, who had been a stalker, detailing how he had kept visiting me at my job, running into me, and leaving notes at my door, all in an attempt to get them to understand. However, once again, I was reminded of what it's like to be a woman seeking help. They told me that if I was so worried, I needed to move or get better curtains. Another officer said that they needed concrete evidence, and my words simply wasn't enough. It was clear that I wouldn't get any help from them unless it was too late. I knew then that if I wanted this stranger to leave me alone, I had to do something myself. Weeks passed, and the stranger tried to get closer and closer to me. The second gifts started appearing on my doorstep. I knew this had gone too far. They were small things at first. Flowers, chocolates, a book I once mentioned to a friend at a local cafe. Then he started coming over and presenting these gifts to me in person. He would often ask Dan out, but I always told him I was busy. Things were getting extremely out of hand. One evening, he knocked excitedly on my door, holding a small box. He proudly handed me the box to open. "I found them together," he said. "They were in love, so I had to keep them together forever." Inside the box were 2 dead frogs he had seemingly killed and kept in a shoebox decorated in white. He called them Chris and Curtis. My stomach turned, and I forced a smile. I felt my insides boiling, and the taste of vomit started creeping up on me. "I have to go," I said, quickly closing the door before running to the bathroom to throw up. He was a monster, a psychopath. The whole time, the telescope stayed aimed at my window, and I caught him looking at it on way more than one occasion.
When he showed up at my door one evening with a stuffed animal and that creepy smile yet again, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. If the justice system wasn't going to help me, I had to help myself. It took a lot of courage for me to do this, but the best thing I ever thought of was to play along. I figured that if I pretended to be his friend, he wouldn't hurt me. He was far too infatuated with me to ever do that, even if I was just a friend. And so that's what I did. I kept him at a distance, but pretended to befriend him. I invited him over for coffee, making sure my brother would be in town that weekend, whose number I had on speed dial. When he walked in, he tried to hug me, but I shook his hand and led him to the kitchen counter. We talked while we drank coffee. He told me that I had the most beautiful bedroom and that I looked even better so close up. We were only sitting in the living room, so I knew he was referring to the times he had watched me through the telescope. I felt a shiver run down my spine and forced a polite thank you. It was getting late, and I told my brother to call me at exactly 6 p.m. to give me an excuse to kick the stalker guy out of my house. It was 10 minutes before 6 when I realized I didn't even know his name. He told me it was Joseph. Before I could give him a fake name, he said, "I enjoyed my time here with you, Mia," and tried to hug me again. I shook his hand once more and sent him off. Hearing him say my name was sickening. I felt violated. This nightmare was becoming a lot to handle, and after that encounter, I kept questioning if this was really such a good idea, but I was still determined to stand up for myself, and so I kept going along with it. The next week, Joseph invited me into his apartment to watch a movie. He asked if I had seen The Silence of the Lambs, and when I said no, we agreed to watch it. The movie choice felt odd for a first pick, but I went with it. Multiple times throughout the movie, I noticed he would look at me, hoping that I'd look back. But I recognized that look. It was the intense, dead fish stare men give you before they try to kiss you. I never returned the glance. Each time he invited me over, we'd watch a movie and order food. But over time, I noticed something. He never let me into his room. He always kept that door firmly shut. I knew there had to be something in there that he didn't want me to see. One night, after we watched a movie, I told him I was going to use the restroom before heading back to my apartment. As I got up to head towards his bedroom, he grabbed my arm tightly and twisted it. I jumped, turning around, terrified at what he might do next. He realized he was hurting me and let go. He smiled and told me that his toilet wasn't flushing properly and maintenance would be in to fix it soon. I told him no worries and got out of that apartment as fast as I could. I normally kept firm boundaries around him, but this time I had let it get out of my control. But I knew that room held the evidence I needed to prove his obsession with me. It sickened me to think about what I might find in there, but I knew it was my only chance to put an end to this. One afternoon, I went to his house with a clear plan. I had brought a bottle of wine for us to drink while we watched another movie. We sat down and I poured each of us a glass. Joseph immediately scooted closer, his thigh pressing against mine. He talked animatedly. I nodded and acted engaged in the conversation. As the movie played, Joseph's hand found its way to my knee and squeezed it. I stiffened, but he didn't notice. Instead, he leaned in closer, his breath hot behind my ear, and mentioned how alcohol made him feel more intimate. I forced a laugh. He whispered about how beautiful he found me and how long he had been waiting for that night. I excused myself for a moment, saying I was fetching more wine. I was nervous as I discreetly slipped something into his glass. Returning to the living room, I handed him the drink, my heart pounding in my chest. Joseph took a long sip, his eyes never leaving mine. Gradually, his speech slurred, and I saw his eyelids starting to droop. He mumbled something about needing to lie down, struggling to keep his eyes open. Even while he was fading away, Joseph wanted me badly. He leaned in and attempted to undress me. His movements were clumsy and desperate. Just as his intentions became clear, his eyes rolled back and he slumped forward, holding his head heavily on my shoulder. I gently eased him onto the couch, watching as he fell into a deep sleep. My heart raced as I stood there for a moment, gathering my thoughts and the courage to proceed. Taking a deep breath, I made my way to his bedroom door. It was always firmly shut, but now, with him unconscious, I knew this was my chance. I struggled to open the door at first. I noticed it had an odd-shaped keyhole and was locked. I panicked and looked for a key. I checked the kitchen drawers and the living room, and that's when I knew I had to check him.
I reached for his pocket, afraid he might wake up. I couldn't find the key. I only found his wallet, a vape, and a pack of gum. I thought that maybe this was all for nothing until I opened the wallet and found the key stashed between his money. I felt overcome with relief and took the key to the bedroom. I hesitated for just a second before pushing the door open. The sight that greeted me was worse than I had imagined. The walls were covered in photos of me, some taken through the telescope, others obviously snapped without my knowledge. I saw photos of me in restaurants with my friends, and even some from inside my apartment. There were drawings, notes, and even some of my missing personal items. He had built an entire shrine of me, and it made my skin crawl. I took photos of everything, documenting the disturbing collection. I went through his things and knew this was the evidence I needed. I slipped out of his house, leaving him to sleep. The next morning, I went straight to the police with the photo evidence. They finally took me seriously. The photos were undeniable proof of his stalking and obsession. The same officer who had told me it wasn't illegal to own a telescope said, "We failed you, and for that, I'm truly sorry. Your bravery in gathering this evidence has made a huge difference." Detectives examined the evidence and prepared to arrest Joseph. It turned out he had charges pressed against him for his ex-girlfriend for stalking her after their relationship. He was arrested later that day, and I breathed a sigh of relief. When they asked how I had gotten into his house, I explained our so-called friendship. I told them how he would come over with gifts and how I would spend time with him to gain his trust. I even told them about Chris and Curtis, the dead frogs. The officers were shocked, but understood why I had to do it. As they led Joseph out of his apartment in handcuffs, I stood across the street, watching him. He glanced over at me. He looked hurt and betrayed, but I felt nothing but relief. It has been over a year since it all went down, and although I am happy to say that I have dealt with the situation, the experience left me with a lot of psychological scars and a deep fear of people. The mark he left on me was so severe that I now struggle with dating. I was so scared of my old house and that street that I spontaneously quit my job and moved out, living in my car for about a month until I was able to find a new home a few states away. I also found a job in a field that I like, so that's something, I guess. But in general, life is pretty bleak right now. There are still nights where I dream of him, and every time someone rings my doorbell, I still have the fear of it being him. However, I do know that is not the case, as he was sentenced to 7 years in a state prison, followed by mandatory psychological treatment. At least I can take solace in that.